here are the reasons that I think the impact of what you just talked about might be more limited in terms of at least some of the factors that might limit this particular effect that you're describing. Even though I do find your argument pretty persuasive that there is some effect from all of this, but there are a couple things that make me skeptical about how much this is impacting the market. Because one, there just is so much more demand now than there was in 2019. I mean, when I spoke with Hornady about this, he compared it to what would happen if the NFL suddenly had 8 million more people who wanted to go to football games every Sunday. And how would that industry be able to deal with that in terms of building stadium capacity to house all those people? And again, this is Hornady, so this is a smaller manufacturer that's not Vista or Olin, but is a well-known company and does make a lot of ammunition. They've expanded their operations. But his comparison was making the point that a mature manufacturing industry like the ammo industry, which has been around for hundreds of years now and takes a lot of physical infrastructure to build out capacity for more ammunition to be made, it's difficult to do that quickly. Like you can spin up lines that weren't at 100% capacity, but if you get an influx of demand that's an incredible increase. So here's a quote that he gave me as far as demand goes. He said, he told me this in 2021, so this was last year, but in 2020, we were up 30%-ish. Our whole industry was up 30%-ish. In the short term, you do what you can to maximize hours and maximize what you can. We got that 30%, and now the market is asking me for not just another 30%, it's asking for 80%. So he really put a lot of the supply issues on just pure demand. And I heard this from dealers, from distributors, from retailers, in addition to the manufacturers themselves. I mean, this Winchester Vista told me that sales were up 37% in 2020 alone, and that they've only increased since then. So one, I do think that demand is probably the biggest driver of the price increases and the supply constraints that exist right now. And then two, as you alluded to here, I know you in your piece, you made a persuasive argument about or analogy to the poultry industry, right? The poultry to producers, and how they, with the way that market's been consolidated, the producers could go and put pressure on distributors or retailers to not buy from other producers that are trying to come into the market. I think that's harder to do in the ammo industry, just because if you look at how ammunition is sold in the United States, it's generally mostly sold through smaller gun stores, not through chains. Obviously, there are chains like Academy or Bass Pro or Cabela's, but one, they tend to be regional, and I think the market has actually moved.
I believe Bass Pro
further away from that.
I think they did.
Right. Yeah. Bass Pro bought Cabela's, so there's obviously there's some consolidation there, but
Sorry, I'm just nitpicking.
I think most people. No. I mean, that's true, but my point is just that most people buy their ammunition from local stores if they're buying it in person from your local gun store. That's how I buy my ammunition. There isn't really a Cabela's or Bass Pro or Gander Mountain.
Do you know, are there ammo distributors? Or do the stores get it from?
There are, but you can buy it both ways in the ammo industry. And a lot of people will also, if they're buying in bulk, will buy directly from an online retailer that sells in bulk. And you can also buy directly from the manufacturers themselves too. Vista even has now a subscription product.
It's kind of an interesting question. Why aren't there stronger chains in this industry? There are chains in everything else.
It is an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the market's actually moved further away from chains. Like it seems like mainly a political thing, honestly, because Walmart used to be the biggest retailer of ammunition in the country, right? But they got out of the business almost entirely because of the El Paso shooting, which happened inside of Walmart, obviously, even though that wasn't, obviously you can make an argument about whether that's them selling ammunition is connected to the shooting. But the same thing happened with Dick's. Dick's Sporting Goods is almost entirely out of the ammunition and gun industry at this point, mainly because of politics. And so you haven't really seen, it has been interesting to watch and notice that they haven't really.
So we have a kind of like perfect experiment in an economy where there's like most things are dominated by chains. Ammunition and guns might actually be this area where that's like the opposite, right? Where you can study that and see dynamics, the competitive dynamics.
And I think that's one of the big critiques of the Bass Pro Cabela's merger is that they were actually shrinking the size of that chain, of those two chains by merging them together. And so they're less dominant than they were beforehand. And so, and Gander went bankrupt for most of those stores went out of business. So they got bought up by the guy with the TV show, right? Lemenis or whatever, the guy on CNBC who owns RV World. But yes, and so the one by me closed. The Dick's by me doesn't sell this stuff anymore. So yeah, you've seen sort of the reverse in the retail side of guns over the last 10 years or so. It's gotten less.
Have you seen an increase in the number of independent-owned gun stores, or has it stayed the same and more of it's being sold online?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know that I've seen. Obviously, I don't. I'm just talking about my personal experience here in Northern Virginia, which has quite a lot of gun stores, I think, comparatively to most places. And Rangers probably because of the military presence here. But I don't know that I've seen a huge increase in the number of gun stores that have opened up independently either. I have to look at the National Shooting Sports Foundation's data.
Dick's and Walmart stopped selling. That probably helped existing gun stores. I'm not sure if it spurred the opening of new ones.
Right. That's what I would imagine. It's the other thing that this latest surge has affected supply so much that how much that's helped the retail. I mean, obviously they're probably benefiting from the fact that they've sold out a lot of their stock, but if you can't get new stock in, this is another problem with the general critique like you see Elizabeth Warren or the administration make towards the meat packing industry, where the argument is that prices are going up because it's a similar argument of consolidation, and these companies are bringing in massive profits, but the prices are still going up. But when you look at, like, if you go to the grocery store and there's no meat to sell, I don't think that is because the meat producers want things to be that way. You know what I mean? It's the same thing in the ammo market. Like I can buy the idea that there's this effect exists and is having an impact on the pricing, and the supply isn't increasing as fast because of these factors. But I don't know that they're the main factor or what's driving everything.
So the cattle, the administration and Elizabeth Warren are not like they're getting. So I wrote a piece about the cattle industry. What we're talking about is the spread in the meatpacking industry between what the cattle ranchers are getting and what consumers are getting. And there's been an antitrust price fixing lawsuit that alleges, I think pretty credibly, that since 2015, the packers have been increasing the spread. So that sometimes the consumer price of beef goes up or sometimes it goes down. But the price, it's the difference between the price of what the consumer is paying and the cattle producer is getting. And I think like Elizabeth Warren and the administration are saying this, but what, they're getting it from the cattle ranchers who are, going out of business even as meat is at record prices. So I think it's like a pretty, you're 100% right that the demand is a factor and prices are up because of COVID. But the problem predates COVID, and you wouldn't see prices up as much if you didn't see this consolidation and you had more kind of regional slaughterhouses and things like that. Like I'm pretty optimistic
I think
about that.
that's, yeah, I think that argument is credible and makes sense, just like in the ammo industry. I think what the administration and Elizabeth Warren are doing takes it much further than that particular argument, because I don't think that it explains why we have continuing shortages, because I would imagine that both the meat packing industry and the ammo industry would like to sell us their products. Like, yes, they'd like to have it be at a higher price and with less competition so they can sustain that price and don't have to worry about overproducing as much and these various things we've talked about. But they certainly want to sell you their products, and having nothing on the shelf is not.
I wrote a piece about shortages in February of 2020. So like right before the pandemic kind of hit in force. And one of the sort of the philosophy of modern antitrust, but also it's kind of a broader philosophical orientation, is that efficiency should be the lodestar of our economic policy. So big is good, right? Because big means they're better at things. And one of the things that meant, and this is not just for antitrust, but for trade policy, has been get rid of extra capacity because that's inefficient. Offshore things, offshore production, make everything hyper efficient, which is to say you thin out your supply chains, and that way there's very few costs. You don't carry a lot of inventory. Now, of course, when you do that, you don't just reduce, and you outsource as much as you can, not just to foreign countries, but like a lot of our auto firms are now basically original. They're just assembly makers. They've outsourced a lot of the production of the vehicles themselves to contractors, and then that's true kind of across the board. When you do that, you thin out, like there's a trade-off of efficiency for resilience, and so we're much less resilient. There's just a lot less capacity, and we don't make as much stuff here. And so when you have a shock, your supply chains might be more efficient, but they are way more brittle, right? And then so you don't have the ability to adjust. And then I think, like in February 2020, I was like, we're going to have a lot of shortages when no one else was saying this is a problem. And it's because I talked to supply chain people who were like, oh, this is a really serious problem. And so the economic strategy here and the philosophy I'm not saying that this is just like corporate greed or whatever. What I'm saying is that the philosophy of trading off efficiency for resilience is really dangerous and leads to this kind of problem. And I think that, so.
I agree with that too. And I think you can see that effect in the ammo industry as well, because it affects it in weird ways you might not even expect. And I remember Hornady was telling me, like, the cardboard that they used to make the boxes for the ammunition to go into was hard to find and becoming really expensive, and shipping it became extremely hard to do. And all of these things relate to exactly that phenomenon you're talking about.